Hello, everyone. My name is Cyrus Hojati. I want to talk about something that's happening in our country, a new trend or some trend that is really emerging over time. And that is people are getting fed up with the corruption and policies, not to mention so many of the problems happening in our inner cities. This article talks about the fact that New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago are losing population. They lost population from 2017 to 2018. And I believe that number is about to accelerate. And the question is, why is this happening? Well, first of all, you've got the new tax laws. The inner cities have a lot of taxes. I think Chicago has a sales tax of over 10%. The same, I believe, with LA and New York, or something close to that. And then, of course, you've got the high unaffordability issue, and you've got basically the new tax law, the SALT deductions. I'm really grateful about that component. And by the way, this sort of debunks the idea that rich people got a lot of breaks. A lot of them didn't, because now these ultra-wealthy people living in those high-tax states can't deduct it. So what's happening is people are fleeing these areas. Now, here's my issue with this article. Now, this article is true in many ways. But the problem with Wendell Cox, the author of this, by the way, Wendell Cox posts a lot of articles for the Reason Foundation and many others. And this organization is funded by the Koch brothers. Now, as you know, the Koch brothers funds many studies that's totally pro-sprawl and pro-car culture. Now, I'm not going to take the other side. The other side, which is smart growth, which I oppose as well, and I applaud Wendell Cox for bringing out many of the legitimate criticism and issues with smart growth, is also supported by the establishment. Sustainable Development, National Resources Defense Council, many of that is funded by George Soros. But again, the issue with Wendell Cox is that people are leaving the cities because they don't like transit, they don't like high-density development, they don't like to walk everywhere. That's not necessarily true. The main reason is due to corruption, high taxes, and high unaffordability. Now, while it's true smart growth does cause unaffordability, even the organization has admitted, the main reason it's unaffordable has a lot to do with a lot of other factors. Income inequality, foreign and Wall Street speculation, Proposition 13. It has to do with height restrictions, not just land use restrictions, a lot of other codes that makes the process of building very more difficult, and not to mention limited supply of land, because not all land is the same. So as a result, home prices are going up. So let's take a look at the article. There was big news in the 2018 population estimates that all three lost population, the ones that are over 10 million. And then you can see here all the other 12 top metropolitan areas increased in population, including Detroit. And you can see here that people are starting to really vote with their feet. Now, the area that experienced the largest increase, as you can see here, is Dallas-Fort Worth. As you can see, a lot of people are moving into Texas. Second is Phoenix, which in my opinion, I think Phoenix is kind of overrated. I don't really think it has much to offer. I think you're probably better off living in Las Vegas, which doesn't get as hot, but the winters are colder though. Third is by Houston. And I think, in my opinion, you're probably getting a better opportunity in Georgia and North Carolina. And then you have Atlanta, which I was there last month, right during the time I was at the American Renaissance Conference. Really attractive area, believe it or not. Followed by Seattle. And by the way, there's a lot of reports that Seattle population growth is slowing down, not to mention because of the fact that they have the housing affordability issue, the housing bubble, but also the homelessness crisis. Next is a California city, believe it or not, which is Riverside, San Bernardino County. I was raised there for 13 years. So what this means is a lot of people are fleeing the coastal areas and moving inland. followed by Miami. I think the Miami area is having issues with land. There's a lot of protected areas on the west. And then you can see here a lot of these coastal cities, Boston, San Francisco, are struggling. Detroit actually gained, believe it or not, despite the economy. But you can see here LA, New York, Chicago is losing. And believe it or not, Chicago lost more people than New York City, despite the fact that Chicago is about half the size in the metropolitan area as New York. And you can see here the major metropolitan areas. So this is another factor. This is percentage-wise. Austin was number 1. Number 3, believe it or not, was Las Vegas. I believe in the last 2 decades we were actually number 1, but I think the reason for that is because there isn't a lot of mega resorts that's currently opening right now, which is creating a lot of job openings, but we'll have to see with the Drew and the resorts world if that could accelerate population growth. And then you can see here, you see a lot of cities in Texas, Arizona, Florida. But again, this is not just the large metropolitan areas with the high taxes. As you can see here, New Orleans is struggling, Buffalo, St. Louis. A lot of these, Rochester, these are Rust Belt cities. They're still struggling. Now, we'll have to see if the manufacturing jobs will be coming back, as they have promised. Los Angeles, and then the largest percentage decrease is Pittsburgh. So this is really, really an interesting shocker. And you can see here a lot of medium-sized metropolitan areas are decreasing too. Like Jackson, Mississippi, lots of issues with crime and poverty. Honolulu, again, a lot of this is housing affordability. And then you can see here on the top is Lakeland. So I believe this is a lot of it is retirees. Boise, Fayetteville, Arkansas, I believe that's where Walmart is located. Spokane is increasing. But then again, you have to understand a lot of these cities are having housing affordability issues as well. And one of the reasons for that is because there's a lack of labor. There's also a lack of builders, lack of competition. There's many other issues why this is happening. So a lot of this is not just what Wendell Cox likes to usually point out, urban growth boundary, growth restrictions, and so forth. There's a lot of other factors. Now, this is domestic migration. This is factoring exchange within the states of the U.S. So in other words, if you only factor in people who are coming from other states, excluding immigration. Number 1 is Las Vegas. Well, bravo. This means that a lot of our population growth is coming from other states. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, is this really good for a lot of the issues that you talk about? Because we've talked about immigration and a lot of other issues. The answer is not necessarily, because of the fact a lot of those people who come to Nevada are from California. Now, I don't mean to play the identity card, but a lot of those people, based on my research, happen to be minorities. And as you know, minorities tend to vote for the politicians like perhaps Masto, Rosen, Reid, Sisolak, and so forth. But again, that's a totally different video that we'll have to do. But again, the good news is a larger share of our population growth compared to others is domestic. And it's followed by Austin, Phoenix, Tucson, Nashville, which I was about a month and a half ago. And then you can see the areas that are having a lot of people leaving in the domestic level, where a lot of people are leaving the area rather than people coming in from other states. As you can see here, this is San Jose is losing the most, New York, Miami. And again, one of the reasons which you have to understand is why these politicians in these inner cities want immigration is because they needed to pop up their population numbers, their GDP numbers. Again, this is not just cheap labor, votes, business, it's population numbers. Because otherwise, a lot of these areas would be following in the similar fate of perhaps Cleveland, St. Louis, and Detroit. So they need the immigration to prop these numbers up. So Los Angeles is having negative numbers, Chicago, San Francisco, including in the domestic level too. So that means that if we stopped all immigration levels, now I don't know if this factors in birth rates, because again, you have a lot of anchor babies that are being born in LA still. they would be losing population. And a lot of people who are actually people who are born in the United States are leaving San Jose. But what you're having is a lot of these immigrants, particularly from Asia, that are flooding the Silicon Valley. In the areas with the largest domestic migration in the medium size is Lakeland. As you can see, a lot of retirees are moving in. Boise is experiencing a lot of domestic migration, as you can see, because I believe a lot of white people are moving into that state. And it's kind of interesting, about 10 years ago, a lot of people were saying, well, people are abandoning the suburbs, there's a foreclosure crisis and all that, people are wanting to move to the inner cities, and that really turned out not to be true. As you can see here, major metropolitan areas were having increases in domestic migration, but we saw that number turn over as the housing affordability crisis, particularly for rent, started to accelerate, and people began to move out to really the middle-sized metropolitan areas or the suburbs. And you can see here the large metropolitan areas are experiencing a net loss. You can see here the net domestic migration is, as you can see, looking really bad for the larger areas. And then let's take a look at the suburban counties. As you can see here, a lot of people are moving out. Now, could this be because people are really tired of big city living, as Wendell Cox tries to point out? Not necessarily true. Again, a lot of this is affordability. A lot of this is high taxes, corruption, and so forth. And by the way, a lot of this also has to do with demographics, and it has to do with the issues of foreign-born, domestic-born, race too. A lot of this has to do with certainly people are moving out in areas because they don't like the cultures that live in the inner cities. Although we do see a lot of, particularly whites, are moving into the inner cities in some areas across the country. And I believe that is the case happening in Atlanta and many other cities like Washington, D.C. And you can see here the suburban cities are having an advantage. Now let's take a look at this chart right here. You can see right here, New York City is actually losing population. So I believe this is why mayors like Bill de Blasio, which I confronted him about a couple of months ago, are pretty terrified. Los Angeles is losing population. Chicago is losing population. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Dallas-Fort Worth is increasing a lot. I bet a lot of them are from California and the Midwest. Houston. Now, keep in mind, though, a lot of cities, big cities, may be increasing in population, but their domestic migration is actually negative. So this, you can look at Washington, D.C. You can see Houston is actually having a negative domestic migration. So this could mean a lot of immigrants are supplementing much of the population growth. And I bet a lot of Democrats want that because they want to turn Texas blue. Now, the question is, if Texas and Arizona turns blue, is this game over for the Republican Party? God knows. Miami is having a big loss in their domestic population, but their actual population is going up. And again, a lot of this is because of the fact that Miami is becoming quite unaffordable, but we're still seeing a lot of immigrants that are coming from the Caribbean and South America. You can see here Philadelphia is losing domestically. Boston is losing domestically, but it's increasing in the overall. Phoenix is increasing a lot. San Francisco is decreasing domestically, but it's still slightly increasing overall. By the way, San Francisco is separate from San Jose. Keep that in mind. And you also have to understand that Orange County is also included in Los Angeles, too. But San Francisco is still seeing an increase in their total population, and a lot of that has to do because Asians are still moving into the Bay Area. So you can see here Riverside, once again, is still having an increase in both domestic and total population. A lot of Californians are moving to the Inland Empire. Detroit is losing domestically, so we're probably seeing an increase in immigrants moving in, probably from Muslim countries. Seattle is barely seeing an increase in their domestic population, but a lot of increase in their total population. So this could mean also a lot of Asian immigrants. Minneapolis, not an increase in their domestic population. And again, this is metro area, but a huge increase in their total population. And what could that be? Could that be because a lot of Somali refugees are moving in? San Diego is negative for domestic, but positive for total population. And I think a lot of that is affordability. But San Diego is a pretty overall attractive place to live. In my opinion, it's kind of immune from a lot of the problems of California. Denver is still growing, but not so much in domestic. Tampa is booming. Baltimore is pretty struggling, a lot of crime, a lot of poverty. Orlando, a huge increase in total, but not so much domestic. And you can see here, San Antonio is growing, Sacramento is growing, and then look at this, Las Vegas. You can see here, Las Vegas is at 2.21%, a pretty high number, but most of that is domestic. Keep this in mind. But then again, just because it's domestic does not mean that they're non-immigrant. And then you can see here, Austin is booming. Austin is actually beating us. Cleveland is struggling. Somehow Columbus is not so much. San Jose, barely increasing in the domestic population. Or actually, it's losing a lot in the domestic, but again, immigration is supplementing that. And then let's go down the list. As you can see here, Memphis is actually negative by contrast from Nashville. Milwaukee is barely increasing. Wow. This is not looking pretty good at all. Fresno is having a negative domestic increase. So people are not moving to the Central Valley so much. Buffalo is struggling. Rochester, New York. Now look at this, Salt Lake City. This is kind of interesting. Salt Lake City is barely having an increase in their domestic population. This is a big shocker, though. You would think with the Mormon community they would be growing a lot. Maybe this does not factor in birth rates. I haven't looked into that. But Salt Lake City is having a significant increase in their total population. So birth rates might be included in the total population. But once again, could this be because a lot of immigration? I do not know. And then you can see once you go down right here, Tulsa is having a negative domestic rate. So Oklahoma has very low cost of living, but they're not moving in. It's, I guess, too many tornadoes, God knows. El Paso is having a negative domestic rate. Oxnard, negative. A lot of cities are negative, believe it or not. Bakersfield, negative. And once we scroll down, you can see here, there's a lot of negative cities. But immigration is supplementing their population growth and birth rates. But we have to see how baby boomers come along. And so then again, there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, people are fleeing the inner cities. There's a lot of corruption, the taxes, and so forth, the high cost of living. So let's read the articles. Much of what has been observed in the recent years continues. People are migrating to the south and southwest, but not into California. But the most recent data may portend even more important changes. It would have been more inconceivable 10 years ago that Los Angeles, which was long by some accounts second to only Tokyo in population growth, to sustain a population loss. Chicago's 4 years of losses are adds with modest growth that have been ruled for decades. New York, which now Census Bureau has lost population for the last 2 years, has suffered a large population loss in the 70s, but had gains after that as late as 2011. Finally, growing net domestic migration trends and middle-sized metropolitan trends could provide strongly needed impetus to economies that have experienced challenging times. The news numbers show that what have become the dominant trend a decade, the shift in metropolitan areas that mainly have been post-war suburbs are affordable and have lower cost. It's time for city leaders to stop pretending that there's a massive return to the cities and addressing the reasons why so many of their residents are choosing to leave. So there you have it. People are getting fed up with the corruption. So let me know what you guys think and how you guys think that this is going to apply in the future. And by the way, what is the case for Las Vegas? Could Las Vegas's population actually stop growing? Now, if the tourism economy suffers, this could be the case because population loss occurred about 10 years ago. Also keep in mind, if a lot of those jobs become automated, a lot of people could leave. Now, there could be a lot of other factors that could nevertheless stop that trend. If the Hyperloop gets built from here to Los Angeles, we could become a commuter suburb, so our population numbers could explode. We do not know. But let me know what you guys think. All right, everybody, thank you guys so much. Take care.